your hands on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
And I'll bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief, and I am your host, Patrick Jordan, retired law enforcement. On this show, we watch a crime-related or law enforcement-related show. We review that show. We talk about our own experiences, and we talk about issues of the day. I usually do that with a couple of different guests. Now, my last show was Dirty War, and I had some great guests on. Dirty War was about a fictional dirty bomb that exploded in the center of London. I had Dr. John Sullivan on and retired Sergeant Eric Fox, both experts on hazmat response, radiological response. And it's good to go back to hear their thoughts on where we are today regarding terrorism. So you can find my shows on Pop Culture Minefield on YouTube, Morning Coffee with the Chief. Go back and watch last week's show, Dirty War, with Dr. John Sullivan and Eric Fox. It's a great show. Also, you can find us on Rumble. We are on Rumble, Pop Culture Minefield Rumble. And when you go to Rumble, remember to follow us. We just brought that site up, so we need some people to follow us. And regardless of where you watch the show, be sure to like the show, comment, and forward it to a friend. So this week's show, we're going to do the movie The Departed. But before I get into The Departed and bring my guests on, I want to talk a little bit about the LA Mission. Now, the LA Mission this past week held a different event. They held a back-to-school event. They've been doing this for the last few years. So I do talk about them providing meals for the homeless and beds for the homeless down in Skid Row, some basic services, and at the same time they do outreach to encourage some of the homeless folks to come off the streets and engage in a lengthy recovery process, anywhere 6 to 12 months. They give them wraparound services and work on integrating them to society. But this program, Back to School, they target kids who are on or near Skid Row, who are on the verge of being homeless, and they help provide, they work with people like Walmart and Target, and they provide back to school supplies. And so they come to big tents and they can pick what they need, like they're going to the store, although they don't have to pay for it. And they get their school supplies to go to school. One of the challenges of foster care, and the LA Mission recognizes it, is once the kids turn 18, there's not a lot of support for kids in foster care, and many of them end up on the streets. So doing little things like this, where they give them the support when they need it the most, when they're kids, and so they do in school. So they have other options than just leave foster care and go right to the streets. They can leave foster care and maybe go to college. So it's a great program, Back to School, put on by the LA Mission. To help the LA Mission, go to losangelesmission.org, look at their website, make a small donation, $25, $50, $100. You can hear Corporate America is also helping, but this entity is a faith-based organization, so they don't get any money from government. It really depends upon private citizens to help the Los Angeles Mission complete their mission, and they're expanding it. They're doing outreach, and the return to school or back to school event helps those foster kids. So let's get on to our movie. So today we are doing the movie Departed. Let's bring on my guest. My first guest is retired Lieutenant John Baylis. He's been on before. Now, this movie is based in Boston, and John actually was born in Boston and was raised partly in Boston before he moved to L.A. And John worked for me for a long time. He's a hard worker, blue collar, just like in the movie. These are blue collar, salted people, and that's Johnny B. So, hey, John, hello.
Fine. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Hey, thank you for coming on my show. And you are from Boston, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Grew up in Watertown. In fact, one of my uncles, Uncle Gene, he's long since passed. He was a World War II vet. He lived in Somerville, which is where the Winter Hill Gang is from.
Got it. Got it. And well, obviously we talked, you left at 9. So, but some of your family probably knew about the stuff that was going on in Boston. It wasn't, it was fairly overt, particularly in the Irish communities. Now, did you live near the Irish communities? I mean, there was a kind of a mingling of the Irish and the Italians in Boston,
Yeah,
right?
I didn't. My uncle did. He lived up there in Somerville with his family. But what you got to understand about the East Coast, especially back in the 50s and 60s, it was different than LA. It's more homogeneous, and everybody lives close by. I lived on 8 French Street in Watertown, and our entire block was about 6 or 7 houses on each side of the street before it hits the Charles River. The next door people were the Greens. They were Jewish. Everybody else was Italian. The next block over was all Polacks. But everybody got along. Everybody loved each other. My grandfather would grow his tomatoes, and when he had too many, you just take bags and go to everybody's house and give bags of 5, 6 tomatoes to everybody.
Yeah, that was my experience growing up in the city of Detroit. We had the Polish, the Italians, the Irish, and that's the parish that I went to. I imagine you went to a parish. Everybody kind of commingled, and the common bond was Catholicism for a lot of us, right?
Oh, yeah.
We all went to the same church, right? And so similar experience. Everybody got along. My mom learned how to make a good spaghetti and meatballs from the Ionacellos down the street. One of my favorite meals it's a comfort food for me when I go home. Yeah, make some meatballs, Mom, and so it's good food. But hey, so let's bring on our next guest. It is Cliff Yates. Cliff is a retired sergeant from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Now, Cliff has been on with me before, and Cliff did a good turn for me. He hosted one of my shows when I was otherwise detained, and so I thank you so much for that, Cliff. And so the Cliff is actually in the East Coast right now. He's also not none of us are natives of Los Angeles. We all have our own experience from East Coast. And Cliff is from the state of New York, and that's where he is now. He's on an island, which is kind of cool. He also has his own show, The Cliff Yates Show. You can see it scrolling underneath there. So give him a listen. I do listen to him every now and then. I caught his show on Stoicism. Now people are going, "What the heck is Stoicism?" Well, Stoicism is it's an ancient school of thought. The ancient philosophers, Greece, for the most part. And I think Romans kind of picked up Stoicism as well. And Cliff was making a yeoman's effort at trying to explain Stoicism to his audience, and I did appreciate it because it's something that I had studied before. Welcome, Cliff, and I appreciate your adventurous spirit on taking up a philosophy like Stoicism.
Thank you, Chief. It's great to be on the show, and boy, I had such a great time hosting that one show that we did. And matter of fact, I brought on Patrick McDonald, who has a podcast, Cops and Writers, where he started out just helping people that wanted to know how to accurately write in their novels, police procedurals. And through that, he's also brought in a lot of cops who are writers. And so he offered to have another guest come on as another co-host, which was Vic Ferrari, not his real name, who's a retired NYPD detective. And since then, him and I have become friends. I was on his show. He was on my show. So I've met a lot of people through these formats. I really do appreciate it. And it's good to hook back up with you. And also John Baylis, who I guess we all work together in West Hollywood. And so it's like getting together at the kitchen table over a cup of coffee, which is kind of what I miss about way back in the day. We would get together for a cup of coffee and discuss current events and like movies like we are now. So such a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, no problem. And I will say I started doing this, I think, in March, and I enjoy it because I get to reconnect with old friends, and I meet some new friends because I had a NYPD guy on, and we did the movie. Oh God, I'm losing the movie. Oh, we did The French Connection. And I had Ralph Ornelas on. So you guys know Ralph.
Yep,
he was in
Ralph,
charge of our narcotics bureau. And Ralph had a friend who had been in charge of NYPD's narcotics bureau. So it was really a great show because I I got to ask things like, when they do surveillance in New York, how do you do surveillance in Manhattan? It's not easy, right? And I mean, that's just a simple thing. And I had an expert who had done surveillance in Manhattan, right? So it was good stuff. Now I actually invited you guys on because, I know you guys prepare, and this show, The Departed, has a great backstory. Let me announce the show, and then we'll get a little bit in the backstory. So The Departed was a movie that was released in 2006. It's a crime thriller directed by Martin Scorsese, and I think he got an Oscar for Best Director on this movie. That's his lone Oscar, and yeah, right. And it was a fantastic show, and and it's based upon a movie out of Hong Kong called Eternal Affairs, which I did not know. But they dovetailed real life stories regarding the Winter Hill Gang and Whitey Bulger, which we'll get into in a bit. But it had just an ensemble cast: Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Jack Nicholson, Mark Wahlberg, Martin Sheen, and we also had Alec Baldwin. So a lot of really good actors in here, so we got the shooter Baldwin on, right? He's on. But what I really liked about this show, the writing was fantastic. There's so many so many great one-liners, and the exchange between these actors, and we'll get into some of the scenes, was really fantastic. Now, as a retired chief, and John and Cliff, now I would probably be cringing at some of this conversation in the office and at the briefings, and I'd be holding my head down going, oh, God, I got to report all these guys, because they were letting this stuff fly with, how's your mother? Well, I'm, tired of sleeping with her, or whatever. Your dad's tired of sleeping with her. I mean, they're just the stuff that they wrote and said was very entertaining. It did remind me a little bit of LA Confidential. I did the movie LA Confidential. Just fantastic writing, one-liners. We'll get into some of those one-liners because they were just great. But this movie was very well received. Mark Wahlberg actually was nominated as Best Supporting Actor. I don't think he won, but this made a lot of money. It's a very fun movie to watch, but it is based upon a true story. And let's get into that true story a little bit. And hey, Martin, can we get a picture of Whitey Bulger? So Whitey Bulger was the head of the Winter Hill Gang in Boston, and the other one. So let's do the picture of Bulger first, and then we'll bring up the crime family kind of hierarchy. But Whitey Bulger was well connected. He grew up in South. He grew up in Boston, and he knew all these other gangsters. And he ended up being, when Howie Winter went to prison, he ended up being in charge of the Winter Hill Gang. And I guess Winter Hill it isn't named after Howie Winter. It's named after the area, the Winter Hill area, right? So it was a little bit confusing. But the thing about Whitey Bulger, if we don't have a picture of Whitey, Martine, go ahead and put the org chart up there, and you can see him there. He's right next to Steve Fleming. But this was kind of a loose affiliation of mostly Irish, some Italians, and mixed, that lived in the area, that had their own criminal organization, and they controlled central Boston, and in competition and in cooperation with the Italians, La Cosa Nostra, the guys that worked out of this is Delaware. I think it was Providence. Oh, I'm sorry, Providence, Rhode Island up there. But these guys also, if you look at this org chart, you got an FBI agent who was compromised, John Connolly, who ended up going to prison. And these guys were in a cooperative relationship with this crew to take down their enemies and so they can control central Boston. But you also had, as in the movies, it's the state police that infiltrate the gang, right? It's the state police who do this, but it's also the state police that have corrupt people in their stuff. And we do have a statey, as they called him in the movie, on this org chart. I think it's Richard Snyderhan. He's a retired lieutenant now. He's retired now, but he was corrupt, and he was taking money from these guys for a long time. You can take that down now, Martine. So these guys were deeply connected with law enforcement. All of these guys, the law enforcement guys and these mobsters, all kind of grew up in the same area, Southie, and they were friends. And as they grew up, they had those bonds from growing up, and they had a cooperative relation. Now I did a movie before, and it might have been Cliff that was down there, and I talked. I think it was the one with Fort Apache, right? I talked about corruption.
Fort Apache.
These guys, back east, the corruption was a lot more accepted, right? In New York and in Boston. And so here these guys grew up, they see the big guy in the neighborhood and this guy with money, and they kind of, as I read up on this, Connolly kind of idolized the Bulger brothers. One of them went on to run the assembly, a politician, and then Whitey Bulger running the criminal crew. And then Steve Fleming, who was kind of the right-hand man to Bulger and kind of had his own thing going on as well. He was very close friends with the state police lieutenant who was corrupted as well. So these guys all grew up in the neighborhood, and it said right in the documents, my research, that the state police guy idolized this guy, Steve Fleming, who was a mass murderer. he killed like 10 people. He was a killer. But from the neighborhood, those old bonds, and they worked together, and they informed on their enemies to take them down. And then of course the police told them when others were taking them down. And like in the movie, everybody kind of knew the FBI was corrupted after a while, and they kept them out. They say that in the movie. But there was also corruption in the state police here in real life and in the movie. So it's very interesting. So John, did you get a chance to read up on that? You're from Boston. Obviously these things happen. Bada Bing, the La Cosa Nostra was there.
Everything's what's that word? Incestuous in some of those neighborhoods. When Connolly, the FBI agent, which was loosely based on, they used to use Matt Damon's, even though he was the special investigator for the state police, everything was based on Connolly. Connolly married one of 4 wives. His first wife was a secretary with the Special Investigation Unit, but her brother-in-law was a high-ranking mafioso, and they all lived next to each other, lived next door. Yeah. Friends. They had dinners together all the time. But Connolly also grew up, like you said, he idolized Whitey's older brother, and then he got in with Whitey, and Whitey actually saved his ass from being beaten by a bully when he was in junior high. And ever since then, he just idolized Whitey, and once he got in the FBI and wormed his way over there, the rest is history. But yeah, a lot of incestuousness there where, they all lived next to each other. They all grew up. They all knew each other. In fact, in the movie, you see it when they're interviewing Damon, and then they interview DiCaprio, and Mark Wahlberg's talking shit to them all because his relatives were all douchebags. They were all criminals. Your uncle, going off and on. And it's true, though.
Yeah.
They were. And everybody's like that back there.
Yeah, well, let's roll the first scene. I think I labeled it Boston because we're talking about Boston. We might as well, right? And you're right. So John, they were well connected. Many of them probably went to the same church, and in this show they were really irreverent towards anything related to faith. At least Jack Nicholson's character was towards anything Catholic. And I think at the time they were fighting that lawsuit against the Boston diocese that did not do what they were supposed to do when it came to abuse of kids and other folks. So I think it was just part of the politics at the time, but he was pretty irreverent. But what I liked about the beginning of this, the movie, is it showed that some of the stuff that was going on there, they had disruption going on in Boston. They were they heavily resisted busing. You can tell that was one of the issues of the day that they were struggling with. And there were a lot of threats to the community. Now, I know, I've been to Boston, and they did a train that connected Southie with everything else, and that really helped change the city and expand opportunities for Southie. But there were some areas that were poor working class neighborhoods, and many of those areas were poor Irish or working class Irish and Italians, right? And then you had, I think the Roxbury was the black section, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And they were partitioned off, and that was a little bit of like Detroit that I lived in as well. But it shows some of that stuff that's going on, and it shows Jack Nicholson supposedly as a young man, and that Sullivan is the name of Matt Damon's character. He's in real life it's Connolly, but he idolizes him. He idolizes him and looks up to him. as the guy. But we've seen this in other movies, right? I mean, Goodfellas. The young guy who ended up flipping idolized the gangsters in the neighborhood. There's plenty of movies by Scorsese where they show that, where the guy with the snaps, the guy with the money, is the gangster. And so that's why. What do you think about that, Cliff? That does happen, right?
Yeah, it's funny. There's so much. What truth is stranger than fiction, right? It's just amazing. And I grew up in upstate New York, so we really didn't have, except for Rochester, we weren't around a gang or a organized crime atmosphere. But I did have a friend. He went to Key West to become a police officer at age 18, and then he comes back to upstate New York, and he's going to be a police officer in a small town. And but he had been to a funeral in Buffalo, New York, a relative who was a part of organized crime. So the chief brought him in. It's like a five-man department, and the chief brings him in and says, "Hey, Tony, I can't really hire you. You were on the front page of the Buffalo papers. You're a pallbearer in this organized crime, funeral. I really can't hire you." And so my friend Tony goes, "Hey, do what you want to do, but I can't guarantee your safety." He ended up hiring him. I don't know. It's just some of these things. I know there's a lot of truth to the back of these stories.
Years ago, I like mobster movies, and I like the history of the mob. So Buffalo did have a very powerful crime family that was part of the commission, and many times would come in and help negotiate, truces between the fine families that were operating in New York.
Yeah.
Well, in their world, well respected. I think we can look at all the murders and say that they didn't really deserve respect. But that was, this is what happens in these big cities back east, the Black Hand, all this stuff. Over generations, you do have these mafiosos, and we had Irish mobs as well. I mean, Owen Matty in New York, and you saw it in the gangs of New York. We had Irish gangsters as well, and so these things do happen. We had these ethnic gangs, and the Italians held on for a long time, but they're probably still strong in New York, but they're around the country. LA, they're not very strong at all.
No, I think and I studied them in New York, right? Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Colombo, the Bonanno families were the five families. I guess each one represented the five boroughs of New York. But we did have some connection, right? In West Hollywood, there was always rumor there was connection up at the Rainbow Room, and
yeah.
So, and wasn't who was the famous who was head of the Bonanno family? John Gotti. Wasn't Gotti's daughter? She was always up on the Sunset Strip too.
Yeah, I was a night detective for a while, so I got briefed by our organized crime, in certain areas that I needed to go in and just tell them what's going on. And they showed some pictures. I was working. We had the valet got slapped up at a joint, and it ended up being the son of Gotti. He was much younger, and and his friend who slapped him around, and those guys came in. Does this look like the guy? Yeah, it looks like the guy. So yeah, we did have it going on, but anywhere there's a place to make a buck, they're going to make a buck. I was working, and we used to have a place. Now Fleetwood's in Maui burned down recently, right? But there was a Fleetwood's that opened up on the Santa Monica, down the street. I want to say like Larrabee. There was this building that they kept trying to find something to do. It had no parking, but they opened it up as a Fleetwood's, and they didn't get their liquor permit. And suddenly the $500,000 sound system was ripped off out of there, and they said that the place was mob connected, right? Now, I don't know if that's true. I mean, I'll take it from our organized crime guys. They know what they're talking about. And but Fleetwood did open a place in Maui, and I just saw him on TV, and his place burned down. He lost a lot of memorabilia. I mean, I love the Fleetwood Mac, but I don't know if any of that's true, but that's the story I was told at the time. So anywhere they can make a buck, they'll make a buck, right? So let's go into our next scene. The FBI, the state police, and Boston PD. I wanted to talk a little bit about this because, we talk about corruption all the time, but giving information to the mob, having these close relations with the mob is not something that we're really that used to here in LA. Yes, you have people that get corrupted. They do things they shouldn't do every now and then. But it's almost systemic when you think about it, that the FBI not only was Connolly corrupt, but his boss was corrupt, and many of those guys were taking gifts from the Winter Hill gang, and that's implied in this movie. They don't show the corruption of the FBI, but they imply it. And towards the end, they say that Costello, Jack Nicholson's character, is actually an informant for the FBI. So that exists. And then you have the state police. The stadies are all the ones that are, one, trying to take Costello down, but also Costello have somebody in the stadies, very much like real life with this guy, Richard Schneiderhan, with Whitey Bulger's crew. So the stadies were corrupted. But an interesting piece of information, during this movie, you don't really see anything about Boston PD being corrupted in here, but the second in charge of the Winter Hill gang, Steve Fleming, I think his name was, his brother was a Boston police officer, and when he was in trouble, he went and moved his 70 weapon arsenal so that Steve wouldn't get in trouble, and he went down for that. So there every one of these organizations were corrupted in some way in real life, and then of course we see it in the movie as well. Hey, John, your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. They were dirty, and there's a lot of stuff in there when you see, like that first scene we saw where they're at the milk shop and he's getting his money. That actually didn't happen the way it happened, but it was there that that little kid was Connolly.
Yeah.
And after that is when he got mugged by the bullies and was named took care of him. But on this, there's a lot of, we've had a little bit of this in LA recently where we used to work. There was after I retired, a guy we used to work with, I won't mention his name, but he was apparently getting kickbacks from the whorehouses, the Asian ones, and he would dime them off whenever there's going to be a raid. So that happens, but here it's much more prevalent back east. At least it was back then, because everybody's so congealed together. And you know somebody. Everybody, I'll tell you, just about every family. My family was not in the mafia, but we knew people that were. Yeah. My grandfather and all that, and my uncles knew people, but we weren't associated. We'd say hi and that was it. But everybody knows somebody that's doing something. And when you get somebody like Connolly that you can turn because he looks up to you, that's what's going to happen. And it happens a lot.
Well, and like the movie, Connolly used those connections to his benefit career-wise. He would get information, take people down. And you see that with Matt Damon's character, Sullivan, right, Cliff? So these guys, he had the ability to get information and take people down, and that helped build his career because he went very quickly from the academy to sergeant, right? And he was in charge of some crew. And it's because he had these connections. So it was a mutually beneficial thing for them because, you get increased raises, you get, travel, everybody, pats you on the back. And plus he's clearly as you see when he buys a really nice place across from the Capitol building. I have a co-signer. His co-signer was Costello, right? Right. So he used these guys to benefit his career, just like Connolly did. And he served their needs to keep these other entities that were not corrupted off the back. What do you think?
Yeah, that's it's funny because then remember there's another guy because he starts, like you say, climbing the ladder quite quickly, and then there's another guy in his academy class that he sees and he's still in uniform, and he tells him, hey, you shouldn't still be in uniform. You should be. I can help you out. And of course, that relationship becomes very important later, as does the one with Anthony Anderson, which is kind of key later on when, DiCaprio has confronted what's his name, and he has to tell Anthony Anderson, hey, you know me. So I'm actually in the police department. And that was a key. The writing was so good in that movie. Everything was tied together. It just, God, that's what.
Well, you're right, and we need to get into the next scene, Martin, and that is the Departed scene. And what the interesting thing is, you watch both Sullivan, which is Matt Damon's character, and then Cardigan, which is Leo DiCaprio. Costigan. They're right in the academy, and they're already being groomed. One to be a criminal who's masquerading as a cop, and the other one who's going to be a cop who's going to masquerade as a criminal, right?
Yeah.
And now I had somebody else on my show. You both know him, Anthony Shapiro, right? And what you guys probably don't know is I went to the academy with Anthony. We actually have the same birth dates, believe it or not.
Wow.
And he was taken straight out of the academy to do undercover work. And one of the things he told me, he said, one of the reasons why they did that is they didn't want me to look like a cop and act like a cop. So they took me right out of the academy in the hopes that I wouldn't be tainted and get my hair cut short and carry myself like cops eventually do. And he's right. We kind of have a look, right? And they did the same thing with DiCaprio's. They take him right out because they want that Southie, because he grew up elsewhere, but he would visit Southie on the weekends, and so he knew the shtick. His family had been connected with some of these gangsters, but his mom and others had kept him away from it. But he still knew and engaged with the people in South Boston, which is where all the nefarious stuff was happening for the Irish mobsters, right? And what they didn't want was him to start carrying himself, start thinking and acting like a cop. They wanted him to act like the person,
Right.
which is Anthony grew up in Glassell Park, which was kind of rough back when he was growing up. So that would have been the 70s and 80s. John, you were near that area, right? That's a tough area, right?
I know it well, yeah.
Yeah. So it's very consistent. So good writing. And I don't know who advised him, but absolutely correct. If you want to put somebody deep undercover, you have to get them so they don't look like a cop, which is what they did in the movie and what we actually did in real life with one of our own undercover detectives, Anthony Shapiro. What do you think, John? That was wise. That was smart, huh?
Oh, very smart. We've done it many a time. When I was in court a couple times in West Hollywood, they had pulled a couple females out of the academy. Young Hispanic girls, they're beautiful, in great shape, but they had tattoos on their belly button, and then they'd pierce them, and they just looked the part. They didn't look like cops. They didn't act like cops. They just got out of the academy, and they would go around, and do the stings with the Vice Squad.
Yeah.
And they'd hook people up left and right. Same with the narco. Same thing there. We do that all the time.
Yep. And for the very same reasons, right? We don't want to.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
For the very. What do you think, Cliff? That was one good move. Two, real life, and
good move, and also it fit in with the story that they I thought interesting that, hey, we can't, we're not going to reveal who our UCs are, right? You can't see them, you're not going to know who they are, which fit into the story. It kind of comes up later at the end, so that it makes sense that no one knew DiCaprio and who he was, except for Anthony Anderson. And so that fit in. Although, in our department, I remember in narcotics at Linwood, I forgot his name, but the head of the narcotics unit, he would bring their UC around. He wanted us to know who he was, and see him so that we didn't make a mistake on the street. And I don't know. So there's a different philosophy, I guess, in how you do that.
I was, Anthony, he told me, he goes, there were times when I went back to uniform, I would interact with guys that knew me as a UC, bad guys that is, and they never recognized me in uniform. And it was vice versa.
Yeah.
It went the other way too. I'd be out there doing undercover, and guys that I knew in uniform didn't recognize me because they didn't, they weren't looking for me. They were looking at, so
yeah.
So you probably got just a few seconds there, or at least a couple minutes, if you're in a delicate situation, to get the hell out before they actually do recognize you. But the other thing about this scene, as you can see him, he's going through his, they actually arrested him for a false crime, and they put him in prison to give him some credibility. But he in the scene, The Departed, I think that's the one that, I don't know if we're playing that next, but he buries his mom, right? And on the little funeral tag, he gets a thing of flowers from Frank Costello, right? The bad guy, Jack Nicholson's character, because his dad or relatives or his uncle, I think it was his uncle, was in the game, right? And or at least, and they did not want this guy, Leo DiCaprio's character. They didn't want him involved in the gangs at all. They didn't want him involved in any of this crime, and they made that very clear. But they were some of his family were down, but he says it later on. Costello says that he respected the family, and I imagine this probably happens a lot for somebody like Frank Costello or gangsters like him, where they send funerals to families in the neighborhood to build goodwill, even though they're killers. They do everything they can to build goodwill and maintain good relationships with the people in the community, even if it's just, what's $20 for a bouquet of flowers, and people go, oh, Frank, what a good guy, he sent flowers. But it was on that tag that it said, I forget what it said, for the departed, right? John, that kind of happened too. You interacted, but when people passed away, people who were respected in the community, even if they weren't in the game, right?
Yep.
The mafioso sent flowers, right? If somebody was struggling, their kids over at Vietnam or wherever, and get shot up, they send a ham, they do whatever. They somebody loses their job, and they
took care of the neighborhood for the most part.
Yeah.
When the mafia moved out of some of the neighborhoods is when you had the street crime come in, and little old grandmas that were Italian or Irish or whatever were getting mugged. That didn't hold well. The mafia would take care of that because they did not do that to their own neighborhood.
Well, but
they
it was
took
also
care of the people in their neighborhood.
It was also to get tip off, and we got some of our audience are chiming in. Love Jack Nicholson. He was great in his movie, and he was. So thank you, Mighty Orbots. Absolutely great. And talking about gangsters is a really fun subject. Yeah. Go ahead there, Martin.
We have 2 petitions for future shows. We have Collateral with Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx, and the 90s Gotti film.
If you guys want to be the mobster crew, we'll bring you back and do we got to do, after doing this movie, we got to do Dark Mass. So Black Mass. I'm sorry, Black Mass. So that's the actual true story of Whitey Bulger.
Yep.
And it's such interesting history. We'll have to do that. So maybe you guys will be my mobster crew. I'll bring you back for the next mobster movie, back east, right? And it's always it's so entertaining. Why do they do movies? A lot of cop movies and mobster movies, because it's so entertaining. It's so interesting, and it's so out of the norm. People aren't used to that kind of stuff. But a lot of it is real life, and
Black Mass is very real.
Yeah. So he sees Karsigan, or DiCaprio's character, his mom dies, and so all connection to he has nothing to lose. He agrees to become the undercover for the Stadies. He agrees to have to show that he was kicked out. It was when they put a false news report in the newspaper. He goes to prison for a short period of time, and he goes back to the neighborhood to interact with some of the family that's still there, and he starts dealing drug with his cousin, and all of this is to get the attention of Costello, who knows everything that's going on in their neighborhood, gets a cut of everything that's probably going on in the neighborhood, and also doesn't want any bad things that disrupts the neighborhood, because he didn't want it to hurt his business, right? I mean, this wasn't
exactly.
He didn't care that people were dealing dope. He just didn't want to dealt there, and he didn't want anything that would disrupt his ventures. What do you think, Cliff?
Yeah, I thought maybe John can speak to this. I thought it was fascinating off camera that he brought up the fact that these generations, these neighborhoods knew each other, and the families generations back. So how could this? So they almost had to put DiCaprio in jail because, like you were saying, they all knew his family and knew him, and they knew his dad. So when he had been in the academy, why would they believe that he had gone bad? So, I mean, to give a stamp of authenticity, they almost had to put him in custody. And I think, like, where we worked, you could put somebody undercover, and people didn't grow, it was such a transient culture in California, but in Boston, which John could speak to, everybody knew everybody. I know your mom, your dad, and your grandmother. And so that really plays into this whole film. And once again, the writing, how could this be believable? And that's what they had to do.
And they had to, because, you know, they knew that DiCaprio had gone through the police academy.
Right.
But what they were portraying it as, that he was fired, didn't make it because of his family and everything else that he does. And then they stuck him in jail with this false charge to make it more believable, because he was the only one in that family that ever went to police work. They were all crooks.
Right.
Yeah, I think taking care of the neighborhood, as we talked, John, was, as one of our audience says, King's pork call. It's about survival, right? They're building their informant network. I mean, if you're a young kid and your mom dies and you see the flowers come, you remember that, right? You know,
Right.
And so they're getting them at a young age. They're building that allegiance, that neighborhood allegiance, at a young age, and it paid off here. So DiCaprio gets out and he starts doing this drug dealing stuff. He starts doing this crazy stuff, and he goes with his cousin to a bar, and he's sitting at the bar. And I guess he's a teetotaler. He doesn't drink, and he asked for a cranberry juice. And this is what I mean. This is the great writing, right? You know, this is the fantastic, fun writing. And the guy says, "Well, what, are you on your period, right?" And so you remember that? So that's, you know, and in these blue collar, tough neighborhoods, you know, laced with gangsters. Yeah, and if you're a tough guy, you can't lay back on that, right?
No.
So
no, you and I would start cracking up and talk shit to each other, but there, you let that one guy have it, and that kind of solidifies where he's coming from.
And that begins his introduction into the gang. One, it was a great scene, and Frenchie, who actually is akin to Steve Rifleman Fleming, you know, so the real gang, right? He's a killer. He's a top-notch killer. And it's interesting how he says that. He says, you know, there are people you can hit in this neighborhood, and there are people you can't hit. And that guy, I think he said, that guy, another great writing, that guy's almost a guy you can't hit. So you got some splaining to do, right? And and so, I mean, again, a great scene. And then when the guy doesn't respond the way Frenchie wants it, well, he hits him, you know. So the rules are for those people who are lesser than him, right? He can hit whoever, but anybody he wants, right?
Yeah, that was the message. Yeah,
that so it was really interesting. But he's beginning this foray into and of course they start smashing his cousin. You know, man, I don't hit him. They just say, "What are you hanging out with that idiot for?" You know, he's, what do they call him? A cop magnet. He's a cop magnet.
Yeah.
He's a cop.
Yeah, it was his cousin. He was a piece of shit.
Yeah. Yeah. What'd you think of that scene, Cliff? The whole thing, the whole piece, his working his way into the crew, and then just the writing and
it kind of brought in, I think, realism. I think historically during that time, there was a reason why. Maybe it was because of the RICO charges or whatever. You know, the mob didn't want to deal with drugs, right? Because it created a ladder to the boss that they didn't want. They wanted to keep that separation. So although DiCaprio's motivation was to show that he was really dirty so that you could trust me, he was also going against what the mob really had as their principles, that we don't mess with that because it endangers us. And like they said, you're a cop magnet. I also want to mention, you know, most films that have these A plus stars, when they have so many together, usually the movie's not too good. And in this movie, it's fantastic and all these great actors. And I think part of it was because of Martin Scorsese. And I was reading some trivia that actually Al Pacino was the first choice for Castillo instead of Nicholson, but Nicholson ended up coming on board. I forgot the reason, but they made the right choice. They made the right choice for sure. Yeah.
I can't think of anybody else in that character. And you pulled it off. You know, one of our comments said, "Hey, it did come back to the cranberry juice." And in that scene, you know, after Frenchie speaks down hard to him, he says, "You know, so what are you drinking?" Remember this? And there's a delay.
Yeah.
Cranberry juice.
Is he going to change?
And of course, what did he say? He says,
"What?
What are you
Cranberry juice."
Period. So he does the same thing, right? You know, so it's really great scene, great writing,
great
writing.
Execution
by the actors. I mean, they did a great job. And they all did a great job. And I forget the name, the actor's name who played Frenchie, but he was fantastic as well. I really liked
was
him.
Ray Winstone, English
Ray
actor.
Winstone. He was great too. You know, I mean, to some degree, these guys reminded me of the Westies too, which was another Irish gang in Hell's Kitchen, right, in New York. Just the way they act and the expectation that they had to be tough. I'll have to look for a movie on those guys. We'll have to do those guys as well. But let's go into another great scene where there's some fantastic writing. And I get your comments, the irreverent behavior at the briefing, which would, put me, John knows this would make me, I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to handle this? And that's the briefing. And this is the briefing where they're talking about they're going to go after Costello. I think they've figured out that somebody's ripped off some chips from a local factory, and they need to take him down. They're trying to sell him to the Chinese, and just the interplay between Alec Baldwin and Mark Wahlberg, and the discussion about sleeping with your wife, sleeping with your mother, your dad's tired of sleeping with your mother, so somebody's got to do it. This kind of interplay would never happen. It never happened in a briefing that I was at. Maybe John, what'd you think of the writing?
Oh, that was outstanding.
And the execution. And
in those days, it did happen. And when we first came on, you heard stuff like that. And it depends what station you're at and who your sergeant was that was giving briefing. But as we went along and the sexual harassment became huge and they had all these policies, you didn't do that anymore. You had to refrain from all that. But the writing was outstanding. So was the acting.
And I don't know how they managed to pull this off without just busting up laughing, because it was really
I bet you they did.
Very tight. He makes a comment. Baldwin makes a comment, and there's a quick response, and there's another quick response, and there's another quick response, and these things are they're just like clockwork, and they're just really, really good, and it makes it such an entertaining scene. What do you think, Cliff?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's very realistic, to tell you the truth, and I think we went.
He's just not a good person. That's kind of how I see
it.
Yeah, I don't watch anything he's in.
You don't watch anything? Well,
I purposely don't.
Yeah, and he's not as good as he used to be, right? I mean,
well, when he was younger and he did the one where he's the mystical character, where he like vanishes. He was like a crime fighter. I can't think of the name of it, but it was back in the 80s. That was an excellent job, and I liked him back then, but I won't see anything he comes in now.
Well, you know what? If hopefully our audience, maybe they can figure out which one you're talking about. But I remember him in Hunt for Red October. He was the original Jack Ryan.
Yeah, that's right.
And I do think that Harrison Ford was a better Jack Ryan, and I'm glad he got that role from him. But in this, the exchange between Wahlberg and Baldwin in this scene was fantastic. But also, I'm going to throw this one out there because I just loved it. And this was a Wahlberg line, and I just think the writing is fantastic. And they're talking about the FBI. And I wonder if you remember this comment. The feds are like mushrooms. I feed them a lot of shit, and I keep them in the dark.
Yeah.
That was... and I can't imagine ever saying that. It is a classic line, though, right?
Yeah, it is.
I'm going to feed them. I don't want them involved in my stuff. I'll feed them, stuff, but I'll keep them in the dark, and they'll grow like mushrooms. I guess is right. Is the comment? But that is fantastic writing, Cliff. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and I think it's so realistic. And John, maybe you can answer. Maybe you know about this. So I was researching that. I guess a lot of the scenes were shot in New York City because New York City was given a 3% tax break for filming in the city. So they did film in Boston, but not as much as in New York City. And then after the movie was so popular, I guess Boston then gave a 25% tax break to film in Boston. So I don't know if you have any experience with that, John. Yeah.
They're doing that now in LA because, the tax is so high in LA. Nobody's filming in LA anymore.
They really,
which is his own little city, and get a bigger tax break than down in LA.
Well, I'm thankful my son never got into act. Believe it or not, he was. My son he's right now he's 6'2", blonde hair, blue eyes, got the water polo build because he played water polo, and he was recruited for a commercial. And so he did the thing, and he was on the lead guy to get it, and then they moved the production to Canada. And I'm kind of glad it didn't happen, because even though it would have probably paid for his college, it just is not a business. I think, I wanted my kids involved in this whole acting stuff, and there's good people in acting, but there's a lot of pitfalls in acting. There's a lot of pitfalls in acting, right? So. And the culture, as we saw with Harvey Weinstein, the culture is pretty bad. So when we move past the briefing scene, I want to do the all in. He's all in, right? So this is, he's had his confrontation with Frenchie at the bar. They're watching him, right? And he ends up getting in a fight with a couple of guys from Providence. So the mobsters. So this happened. They were trying to muscle in on the Irish neighborhoods, or this gang's neighborhood, Frank Costello's area. And I was reading, this did happen between Winter Hill and the Providence, La Cosa Nostra. There was and they would have to have sit downs and talk about it. But these guys are in there trying to extort. The guy didn't look Italian. Maybe he looked Indian. I can't remember who the actor was, but they're trying to. You moved into an Italian neighborhood, you got to pay, and he's resisting. And DiCaprio's in there, and I think he recognizes this is his chance to get in. And so he assaults these two guys and knocks them unconscious, which, DiCaprio, okay, he plays a tough guy here, but I didn't see him as a tough guy. I mean, just those guys looked a heck of a lot tougher than he did, but he has his way with them, which causes him, because Costello now has to deal with Providence to smooth this over. And this was his avenue in, and he ends up Leo DiCaprio ends up being taken to talk to Costello, as Costello talks to him about this, right? And he's trying. What do I do? They're going to come down here and kill you. What should I do? Who are you? I know who you are. And he wants to see if he's legit, right? You remember? What do you think of this scene, John?
Well, it's great. And when he breaks open the cast on his arm, they're looking for wires, and that's why he told previously, he told his handler, he says, "Hey, I'm not wearing a freaking wire." "Oh, you got to wear." "No, I ain't wearing a freaking wire." And thank God he flushed it down the toilet. And then they break his arm. His arm's broken, or his wrist, his hand, and they break that open just to see. And they want to check everything. That's just what they do, and that's real life right there.
And they tortured him. So I mean, he had, you saw it when he beat up the two Italian guys, right? The guineas, as they say. He got the puncher's break, right? So he punched them. It's pretty clear. John, you were a boxer, right? So if you get if you don't hit him flush, you hit it with the small finger and that, there's a chance you can break those metatarsals right there. And that's called the puncher's break. He got that. And now he's got a cast on, but they use it to their advantage to torture him to see if he's still a cop, right? Right, Cliff? That's what's going on in that scene. But if he gets through this, he's in, right?
Yeah, it was kind of a turning point. Yeah, I had that break too. Yeah, the doctor called it a boxer's break, and man, it's painful. They didn't.
Oh, but, yes, it is. I got that in my right.
Did you? Yeah, it's a good 6 to 8 weeks before you're even. Oh man, you don't even want to. You just want to lay your hand gently on you. It's just terrible. But that's kind of a turning point where I think they start trusting him, and then okay, he's passed the grade. Yeah.
Yeah, I hit a guy. He got me. I ended up getting trapped in a apartment on a domestic violence thing, and it ended up being a one-on-one fight. And I hit this guy so many times, and I thought I had the puncher's break, but I continued to work. But every time I pulled my gun or something like that, I was in pain, and I didn't get it treated. But so that does happen. Martin, you can attest that that's a painful injury, right?
Oh yes, I didn't get it treated. Yeah. Also, I knew my hand was, I certified my hand was broke like 2 weeks later, and the bones that were fused in the wrong way. So,
they don't do anything to it unless it's a clean break. They don't really do anything. They just put it in like a hard soft cast. Mine was in a soft cast, and
I had nothing.
Oh,
I was like that. Then the doctor said, "Well, we can break it again to set it up." Nope.
No.
No.
So, Cliff, were you hitting a heavy bag, or was that a work-related injury?
That was a work-related in Wayside Honor Rancho. I remember the incident because that pain stuck with me, and I would never forget that. I never punched anybody in the head again.
Well, I you learn your lesson. Well, mine was one-on-one. Nobody was coming for help, and I had to.
You got to do what you got to do. That's right.
You got to do what you got to do, right? And but the thing about that, and you say, it's not like you're Superman. You go to work, you do your job, and guess what? You break just like everybody else.
Yeah.
So unlike what is portrayed in the modern media these days, that cops are just looking for a fight. No, if I could talk my way out of a fight, I want to do that, because you know what?
Absolutely, yeah.
Fights hurt. Even if you win, fights hurt. You are hurt, you're broken up, and
this scene.
Yeah, right. So Martin,
is a poem. Yeah, this scene. I love the end of this scene.
Right. Oh yes. Well, okay. Well, go ahead, Martin. So, what do you think about the end of the scene? Tell me what you think.
Because they're talking. Yeah, you're beginning to think that this guy rough up his wife, but not at that extent. And they insert that scene so casually.
Yeah.
Well, so this scene, what we have to understand, like, this is they wrote the script based upon Steve Fleming and Whitey Bulger, and they did kill. I think Steve Fleming killed his girlfriend for cheating on him, and that she was, so this was based upon a true story. And so I think they inserted that scene just to show just how diabolical they are, just how vicious they are, but also to link it to real life, right? And because these guys weren't afraid of killing women, they did kill women, right? So, right, Johnny B, right? I mean, that's the story. So, but there is a great line that they say around this scene. So remember, he beat up 2 Italian guys. They're from Providence. They got some problems, and the two Italian guys end up dead, right? So clearly Costello killed them, and probably says, "Well, I don't know who killed them," right?
Exactly.
But what does he say? What does he say to Frenchie? Well, let's not cry over 2 spilt guineas.
Yep.
Now that is great writing. You know what I mean?
I know it.
Writing,
oh my God.
And let's not cry over 2 spilt guineas. And you know what? These probably just soldiers, even though and Providence doesn't want any problems with Whitey Bulger and, of course, as they Frank Costello, because they do have reciprocal relationships going on, and these guys did kind of invade his territory, right? So
yep.
But let's not cry over 2 spilt guineas. I thought that was a fantastic line. What do you think, John?
Oh, it was great. The writing is phenomenal. You guys know what guinea means?
No, yeah. Explain to us.
In World War II, when the Americans and the British invaded from North Africa to Italy and kicked the Nazis out and got rid of Mussolini's army, they were bivouacked there, waiting to go up into Germany. And it's a very poor country. Nobody had any food or any money. So the British would find these little kids, little Italian kids, my people, guinea. They go, guinea. Guinea's like a penny.
Oh.
And they want eggs. So their mother or their grandmother had a couple of chickens. Hey, guinea, give me some eggs. They throw the guineas down on the ground. The kids, being poor, would come pick them up. It's kind of like in Mexico when you go down there. Sometimes you see the little kids with the chiclet.
Yeah, the chiclets.
You want to, they want to sell it. But there in Italy, that's where the word guinea came from, the English, because it's their coin that they used to get food and wine or whatever they could get.
Well, it is derogatory, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, yes, it is derogatory. So no offense, John. No offense, John.
In Boston, New York, wherever, if you call me a wop and you're in an Italian neighborhood and we're both Italian, who gives a crap? It's kind of like the N-word with the black people. They use the N-word wherever they want. But you don't go in that neighborhood and use the N-word because you're not one of them. Same with the Italian neighborhood. If you're Italian, you can call everybody a chadrone, a scungil, a guinea, a wop, wop without papers, W-O-P. So it's good, and I thought it was friggin' hilarious.
Yeah. So, like I said, the writing and the one-liners are fantastic.
Oh,
and just reminded me of
writing's
L.A.
excellent.
Confidential and some other, and that is a big part. The writing really helps to. Well, I don't want to say it carries the movie because they had some fantastic performances as well. Good directing. Everything was fantastic in this. Cliff, and again, just reinforces the great writing.
Yeah. I think it just like it's like a great meal, right? It would have been a great meal anyways, but this really it spices it up. Just the word phrases and
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. It makes it
yeah,
more real. It really
absolutely, yeah.
does. And it's a funny thing, and nobody said it, but he's the Irish mob.
Yeah.
Scorsese gave him an Italian name,
Yeah.
Costello.
Oh,
And he's
that's
talking shit
right.
about the
Okay.
Guineas and the Wops up in North Boston, which is Little Italy. He's talking shit about them, and Providence and Rhode Island, but he's got an Italian name.
Wow, I didn't realize that. Wow, yeah, that's weird.
And Costello goes back to a real Costello was one of the 5 families in New York.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, somebody's saying that L.A. Confidential is my jam. Yeah, it's a fantastic movie. I've done that one.
Movie.
You go back and watch it on YouTube. We did a great show on that. I had somebody who, well, it was one of John's friends, right?
Yep, me
Buzz.
and
Buzz, yeah, you guys
Buzz.
did it.
His
And
dad worked that. Yep.
Buzz's dad and grandpa were part of the gangster squad. So go back and listen to that because he gives some great history. And when I'm in Vegas, I'm going to go to the Mob Museum because he gave his dad's papers and grandfather's papers to the Mob Museum. So hey, he kills these 2 Italian guys, the Guineas, and the next scene is the next scene is there's a rat in the state police, right? And Costello uses his connections, and you start to see where he does exactly what Connolly did in real life. And that was to set up somebody else for the murder. So I think the 2 Italian guys, they set up a guy named Jimmy Pappas, who I got the impression was maybe Greek or whatever, but he's a mobster in Boston, and he gets set up for these murders. They put the guns in there, they put this stuff, they tell Sullivan this is what you're going to find, and then he makes this big bust of this guy who killed these 2 Italian guys, and this is the level of corruption that Connolly got into with the Winter Hill Gang, with Whitey Bulger and Steve Fleming. And this is based upon real life, John, right?
Yep. Yeah, it was. In fact, if you look at, I did some research on Connolly himself. He got convicted of murder for murdering him and 2 other guys from, I think Fleming was one of them. They went down to was it Miami, and they killed the head of the Highlight Corporation, which they were skimming money from Highlight, embezzling money and washing it and taking all this money. Well, he was getting froggy and he was going to probably testify. So that's what they thought. So Connolly actually drove the car. And so later on, they get convicted. Connolly actually goes to jail. But then he appeals because he only drove the car and he was just there. And some appellate judge lets him out. But then it goes up to the next level, and that judge says, he's as guilty as sin. And they put him back in jail. And eventually he gets out because he's dying of cancer, and they give him a compassionate release to go home.
Connolly got out? I didn't know that. I thought,
yeah.
And he's, somebody referenced, one of our audience referenced Goodfellas. Yes, another great movie, and how the Irish can't join the Italian gangs, and that's true. But the Italians and the Irish will work with each other where there's money involved, and they can both make money, right? But the thing about the setup here, and there was also so the number 2 in the real Winter Hill Gang gave information to set up the number 1 gang for the Patrician crime family. I think it's the people out of Rhode Island. So they had the New England. John, do you know their name? Patricia crime family, and they set up the underboss, I think, for murder or some kind of crime. I can't remember what it was. And he was eventually, the FBI worked with them and hid evidence that led this guy to be in jail for 30 years. He sued the FBI, including Connolly and his boss, and he got $10 million. But these guys set that up just so, like Jimmy Pappas set them up to take the fall. And everybody gets promotions because they just put the the underboss for the patrician or crime family. Big deal in Boston.
Yep.
But they lied, and the government ends up, and the FBI end up, right now the FBI is kind of under fire for how they're handling the Hunter Biden thing, and it goes to show you can have a premier law enforcement agent and they could lose their way, and clearly the folks in Boston lost their way. They became corrupt, and even those that weren't corrupt turn a blind eye to it, right, Cliff?
Right. Yeah. Was on the Whitey Bulger, wasn't he tracked down eventually in Santa Monica? Didn't he end up getting?
He was. Well, and then Connolly tipped him off, right? So, John, what'd you think of my comments regarding setting somebody else up? I mean, these guys, this is evil what they did, although they did it to evil guys.
Yeah.
They're doing it now.
They're
doing it now. Look at the Russia Gate. They're doing stuff to obfuscate and deter people from doing certain things. They are not held accountable at all. And they should be. They've done that stuff many a time, and they're still doing it.
I think when Connolly, you certainly saw it. You saw it with his boss. They're the FBI or they're human beings, right? And so headhunting, getting the big score, getting the big arrest, getting the acclaim, getting the book deals, getting whatever. Because you were involved in the big case. There's no doubt in my mind that there was certainly a lot of loyalty between Connolly, because growing up in Southie, and maybe this guy Richard Snyderhand for the state police with these mobsters. There was a certain amount of neighborhood loyalty, but also there was financial benefits because they were all getting money paid. And in the case of Connolly, just like you saw with Sullivan here with Damon's character, there was a lot of accolades within the organization. They got a lot of benefits. They were getting promotions. I mean, there's a lot of patting on the back coming from this, right? And so these guys, even with today's FBI, I mean, I always felt that with McCabe. Why did McCabe, the number 2 guy that was fired and was dishonored, why would he engage in that? But, he got book deals.
Oh, yeah.
Comey got book deals. They made millions. And I think they knew that, if there was a little bit of gray area to operate in, they would do it with Trump or somebody else because they knew that they were going to be able to write a book and talk about it and sell 1 million copies and make a couple million. And that's all I think. I do think that. And so needs to be a culture shift, particularly at the top of the FBI. I worked with a lot of really good FBI guys that I liked, but I didn't interact with the people at the very top, right? So I don't understand that, but I do understand, just like with people we work, people want to make that big arrest. You get validation, you get affirmation. It's you want to make that big arrest. Now we're not going to get book deals on a big arrest that we make in Los Angeles. But the FBI, if they make a really big arrest, they might just get a national recognized arrest. They might get that book deal. What do you think, Cliff? A lot of it is human nature about being the big guy on campus and the success, right?
Yeah, I think people romanticize about, making the big arrest that hits the headlines, or I don't know. It's just part of, like you say, being a human. You want to get the good. You want to get a good arrest, and it's kind of a natural thing, and it's okay to a certain extent to have it as a motive.
Well, that's why we make pledges, right? We pledge to uphold the Constitution, all that stuff, to restrain our basest instincts, and to kind of operate within the guidelines of the rules, right? And that we have to do that, and so. Hey, but one of in this scene though, and I didn't talk about it. Costello is talking to. What's his name? Let's see. Leonardo DiCaprio, and he's asking him questions, and he's got a hand. He's got somebody's cut hand
in a bag.
In a bag, and he's talking to him like it's no big deal, right? And he said, I was like, and of course he stops wearing a wire at this point. I mean, he's kind of picking and choosing where he went, but after this scene, he's not wearing a wire. And he is going through this emotional change on this stuff because he recognizes just how dangerous these guys are and
ruthless.
ruthless and matter of fact. And the fact that he's handling it and his girlfriend's there and she doesn't react to it all. Everybody's desensitized to this viciousness except for him. And he's got to operate in this environment and look like he's okay with this. He can't react to that hand. If he reacts to that hand, he's got a problem, right? And they know that they have a problem if he reacts to that hand.
And
right?
plus, they're tying him up. They're saying, well, if this guy's a cop, we got him now because he got to
that's
bury
right.
that thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Hey, what a great lesson for putting on a presentation. If you can have a visual aid, you can really drive your point across, which is what Costello was doing, right? He's saying, hey, you know what? Take a look at this. Let's bring this to realistic things.
Yeah.
I can't remember if he said it this time or he said it another time in the movie, but he said something about, see a ring. Somebody can stand this son of a bitch, right? He's basically somebody married this guy, so you must be something good about him. I can't.
That
remember
was the scene. He took the wedding ring off.
Was that, oh yeah,
he did. Yeah.
And and another, horrific scene with this hand, but the line that he says, well, at least somebody, like this son of a bitch.
Somebody
Got
loved
a
this
ring
guy.
in his hand. Somebody could tolerate this guy, and again, great writing, and I like that. And let's roll into the next scene here. Are we done here? And Cliff, all right, you explored the philosophers, right? You explored Stoicism here, right? And so I'll have to get this comment from you. I don't know. Are you Irish at all, Cliff? Or do you got any Irish?
I know, mostly Scottish.
Mostly Scottish. Okay, so maybe
According to 23andMe.
So they said that I can't remember. They got this. Are we done here? And he's talking to the psychologist who ends up having a romantic relationship, and she's beautiful, and but he says that Freud said the Irish are the only people impervious to psychotherapy. Minds are muddled and disorganized. Now, I haven't heard a high class insult for the Irish like that ever in my life, but so he's implying that they're incapable of psychoanalysis because their minds are muddled and disorganized. And I think it was DiCaprio who said that line, but I thought it was a great line. Freud, although he was a great psychoanalyst, he was also a philosopher, right? So what do you think of that, Cliff?
Yeah, I wanted to look up if he actually said that. I actually took note of that. I never did research that, but I mean, I imagine he actually did say that.
He did say that. I had to look it up. He absolutely did say it. I'm only part Irish, so I guess I'm only part of me can be resistant to psychotherapy. I guess the German part is, opens me up to psychotherapy. But John, what'd you think of that line? Fantastic line. It's interesting that these writers are clearly highly educated to draw that in. And
no, it was great. It is a real line, and also having known friends that are Irish, growing up with them. The Irish drink a lot, and a lot of that is, hey, they can probably put a 6-pack down. It doesn't even phase them. A couple 6-pack, a case, of beer, because that's the Irish way, and their brains are a little different because, and I used to tell this to my buddy all the time who's Irish, Brian Roberts. I says, you talk about the potato famine hundreds of years ago, where 1 million Irish died because all the potatoes went rotten. Yeah. You were surrounded by an ocean. You didn't think of going fishing and getting some food. And I get him every time with that. But yeah, Irish are a tough crowd. I'll tell you something.
Well, we'll have to. I had, the thing about it is what little food was left, the English took. So though that and that meant, so and that probably included fish, right? But anyways, the Irish part of me was a big deal. I used to go to the Gaelic League, and St. Patrick's was a big day. Even when I was a kid,
huge.
In high school, we would go bar hopping to the Irish pubs in Detroit, because they didn't card in Detroit. Detroit was kind of a little bit. So I think I went to a place called Dunleavy's, right, and I'm there with all my buddies, and we played football. And one of our teachers was there, and he bought us around, right. So it was he's Irish, of course. It was just a different kind of growing up blue collar Irish. I would go over to my grandparents' house at 17, get a beer, and in fact, when I moved to California, the drinking age was 21. And I go to my grandparents' house, and I didn't have any money, right? I'm moving to California anyways. Doesn't matter. I'm gone. And my
Yeah.
grandpa says, "Hey, you got to come over and paint my garage, and I'll pay you for it." Now they would never give me money, because that's not the blue collar way. But if I went over there and painted that garage, they would give me a couple $100, and that's the money I came to California with. But he supervised every stroke. Mid morning, my grandma would say, "Oh, we got to have cheese and crackers and a beer."
Yeah.
And and then lunchtime, I'd have some soup and crackers and a beer. And then halfway through the afternoon, we have to stop for a break, and I'd have some, goldfish, cheddar goldfish, and a beer. And then of course, when we finished up, my grandpa wouldn't. I think he had the same paintbrushes from World War II, right? So he would never let me clean his paintbrushes, but I could paint the garage. And while he was cleaning the paintbrush, I would have a beer. And by the time it took me a lot longer to paint that garage. But that was so anyway. So the Irish.
That's a cultural thing, and it's true. Just like the Italians and vino.
I had $250 in my pocket when I came to LA. It was from painting that garage with my grandparents, and it was a fantastic experience.
Let me ask John, I think, as impressionable young deputies, we watched this movie. I think it was State of Grace by Sean Penn. And somehow we got it in our heads that we were going to start drinking Bushmills Irish whiskey. I actually still drink it to this day. I actually like the taste of it. But do you remember the scene in that movie State of Grace? They took a bunch of Bushmills Irish whiskey out of some bar. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I have switched to Jameson's now. That tends to be my drink of choice. I just moved away from beer. If I'm going to have a beer, it will probably be a Guinness. If I'm going to have that kind of calories, I might as well have a nice, heavy, dark beer, right?
But it's got to be tapped for me. I got Guinness in bottle in the house.
Yeah.
But
actually,
you get the one with the nitro thing in it, where you pop it and I like that. I get the nice little head on top there of a beer. It's good.
I'm not much of a beer guy. Even I drink wine, but not a big. My grandfather made wine in his basement in Boston.
Wow, I've heard that people did that.
Press and everything. They did it by hand.
Yeah.
They grew the grapes, made the vino, and called it Dago Red. And let me tell you something, it'd take the paint off your car.
Dago Red.
Make the California wines taste like punch, right?
Exactly.
So let's get on to the next scene, Compromise. So Leo DiCaprio, he's in deep, but so is Sullivan, right? And so Leo DiCaprio is giving information. He's finally given information on the chips, and they're going to do a raid, right? And DiCaprio is giving information to Quinlan and Degman, who is what's his name's character now, but Waldron's character, and right. So he gives them the information, and they got it set up, and Sullivan is cut out of this, which is interesting because if you read up on the Winter Hill Gang, like the DEA and other people, when they were building cases, they didn't tell the FBI till the last minute because they knew the FBI was compromised, right? And you see that here. They don't know who the bad guy is. So Digman and Queenan, they're not given any information up as to who their informant is, who their undercover is in his crew, but they know where this at, and of course, they got it figured out. What's his name? Sullivan tells them, "Hey, you're gonna be hit," and they plan an escape, and they get away. But this is really the scene that they recognize. They recognize that they're compromised, right? The raid is compromised. They recognize that somebody's given information. They know that, and so both ways they begin to recognize that we're compromised, meaning the state police are compromised, and Costello realizes he has the rat and his own crew, right? But it's interesting, again, the writing on this scene, right? So they go to this thing. They're gonna sell these microchips to the Chinese, right? To a triad, I guess, for the Chinese. And you say, well, yeah, King's pork call. He hits exactly what I'm talking about in terms of the writing. And he says, who comes without the money? I got my stuff. You need to come with the money. And he says, no ticky, no laundry. right? Fantastic writing, right? Fantastic. What are you going to think of that, Cliff? That's fantastic writing.
I mean, it's
Excuse
just,
me for a minute.
yeah, it's just the comedic. The comedic exchanges are just unbelievable, but I mean, so realistic, right? I mean, it's like if you broke something in a store, right? You breaky, you takey. It was kind of like, a play off on that. But
no ticky laundry. Well, yeah, and you need a ticky to get your laundry because
that's
the
right.
Chinese
Yeah,
ran a lot of laundries in the United States. They still do to some degree.
They do.
And no ticky, no laundry, which I thought that was a great writing, but also as they're they're watching what's going on. They have cameras set up, but they don't have cameras in the back. And I think it was Alec Baldwin's character who's saying, whose job was it for the cameras? Whose job was it with the cameras? Or maybe I can't remember. Waldron said this, right? He said, well, who are you? Well, I'm the guy that does my job. You must be the other guy.
Wow. Yeah, that's right.
That was a great line. I just love that line. And, because they had limited time to set it up, but, Costello's crew knew the bus was going down. They knew, that these guys were on them. So they were arrogantly, they went ahead with it, right? Which shows I guess when you're a 70-year-old mobster.
Yeah.
And you've gotten away with it for so long, you're going to take this risk. When you got these people compromised, the police compromised, you're going to do it anyways, right? Which is going on in the scene. But I really love the writing. I'm the guy who does my job. You must be the other guy. Think about that.
Come on, that is classic.
Here it comes the line.
Yeah, here goes the line. Yeah.
You must be the other guy.
You must be the other guy. Fantastic line.
Yeah, I'm going to use that in some way because I just love that. That's good.
Right. It's it's really so like I said, I really like the writing in the show. And so here he is. They're going through this scene. They make their deal and they escape because they're doing it on the port. And they think they got you know how ports are. You can block off a port except he says they don't realize we got a Navy, right? And everybody ends up going out the back and escaping, and they're getting away. And they realize their raid is compromised. What's his name blows it, and what's his name? Alec Baldwin's character. He gets mad and he starts pushing people around. He's angry. I could never do that as a captain. That's not the way you express your frustration.
Yeah.
But he clearly did here, John. So you missed. I want your opinion on the line. I thought it was a fantastic line beyond just no ticky, no laundry in this case. So they're making their deal here, and the cops are watching the scene, and there's no cameras in the back, so they've already got an escape plan, and they do end up escaping. But Mark Wahlberg's character says to the camera guy, or the camera guy says to Mark Wahlberg, "Who are you?" And Mark Wahlberg says to that guy, "I'm the guy who does my job. You must be the other guy." Remember that line? I thought that line was fantastic.
That was perfect because he didn't do his job. Either he was paid off or he was just inept. No cameras in the back, just one angle on the front. Give me a break.
Yeah, and here he says we didn't figure we had a Navy. So, but again, example of some excellent writing, and even with the boat, they didn't figure that we had a Navy. Another good line. These are great quips. I can imagine if we were still working using, I'm the guy that does my job. You must be the other guy.
I'd love to use that one if I was still working.
There's plenty of guys I would love to say that to.
Yep.
But good, like I said, fantastic writing. There's a reason why this show won an Academy Award and was nominated or given a lot of awards. But so they get away with it. They both realize they have a rat in their crew, and so now they really need to start narrowing down who these rats are, right? And they begin to figure this out in real life. I think obviously the FBI was corrupted, and in real life, the DEA and Boston, whoever was working, even the state police knew the FBI was corrupted. And so people started guarding their investigations. They didn't share it until the last minute, as you saw. In this scene, they didn't share with the FBI. They really tried to keep, as well, Wahlberg says, like, I keep them I feed them shit and keep them in the dark, right? That's what they have to do when it's compromised. And, and there's a lot of sensitive investigations. Johnny B, I don't know if either one of you guys were there. We had a couple of corrupt deputies that I was working when I was working West Hollywood, and Graham and Desiree, right? And they were ripping off people
Coke.
for money and coke, and they were high in coke too. And they did an investigation. They looked at everybody that was going on, and not one word leaked out. And they walked in till the day they walked in and arrested those guys, took their gun and badge. I think they ripped their patches off their shoulders. I mean, they made a big production of it. And all of us had been under surveillance for months, and of course we didn't know it, right? And of course we're all clean, So I've been investigated and I was clean, right? So but these guys were up to no good. And it's funny how you don't. It's funny that what I recognized at the time, you're not looking for it. Like, I was a recognized expert. I had testified in court on being under the influence of coke or other central nervous system stimulants. And these guys were high at work, and I didn't recognize it because I wasn't looking for it, right?
Exactly.
Right.
You're not looking for it, right? There's a certain amount of trust, and you're not looking for it, so you don't see it, right? So were either one of you guys there when that went down, or did you drive shortly after? Johnny B, were you there when that happened, or did you come back?
No, I had left, it was in between my two stints. I heard all about it.
Yeah, and those guys, they were on a special team, and that's the other thing. You don't always. I think it was Special Problems Unit. I think they were on, and they investigated all those guys, and those guys were up to no good, but they weren't up to corruption, right? So they all got in a little bit of trouble, but they weren't stealing or doing anything like that. They disbanded that team, and that's another part of it, right, Cliff? So you don't see it when it's next to you, and you really have to pay special attention to some of those special teams, because the chances of corrupting them are greater than anything else, right?
We had in patrol, we had two twins at Linwood, and one guy, like you say, I didn't look for it, and Mike Smith was, he ended up this guy was acting weird, but we just thought he was a weirdo, a deputy, and he ended up looking over the stall, and he saw him sniffing coke or whatever, and he ended up getting sent back to like the hall or something, and then somebody they found he had like a kid on his leg, and they chased him down the.
I heard about that one. Yeah,
and
those were actually heroin on that.
That was heroin. That's correct. Yeah, and those were two twins. Matter of fact, and they ended up getting them both for fraud because one would work for the other one. They were identical twins. And they would work overtime for each other. Kind of crazy.
Oh my God.
It happens all the time. When I was a trainee at West Hollywood in '81, there was a deputy, I won't mention his name, but he was the expert on drugs. So if we got something and you weren't sure what it was, my training officer, all the other guys, let's go to this guy. Okay, no problem. Well, a couple of years later, he's off duty over in City of Industries area, and that's where he lived apparently, and he's trying to go into a bar there, but at the same time he's being stopped, and he drops a bag of coke, and here comes a deputy from Puente Hills and sees it, detains him. Turns out he's a deputy, finds the drugs, and they did a search warrant on the car, they did a search warrant on his house and his locker. We had to stay away from the lockers because the dog came in and almost ate the paint off his locker. Turned out every time he made an arrest, because he was making a ton of there's a lot of coke there. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And guys would complain to the jailer. I had more than that. What the hell? Yeah, shut the fuck up. Well, he got 3 baggies. He booked 2 in and put 1 in his locker. Boom, boom, boom. So then you found out stolen stuff from deputies.
Oh wow.
Chains.
Yeah.
Flashlights. Like
Flashlights. I remember that. Yeah.
Those flashlights back in the day was $100 for a Streamlight last night. It was very expensive, So
and he got fired, of course, but it happens.
Well, and I will say for the audience, let me clarify a couple things. West Hollywood, where we all worked, is home to the famed Sunset Strip, and the Troubadours in West Hollywood. That's a famous folk place where a lot of folk artists. Carole King played there, James Taylor played there, and the Sunset Strip. You had the Whiskey a Go Go, you had the Rainbow Room, you had the Roxy. Famous places. There's the Comedy Store. I remember meeting Robin Williams there and Sam Kinison and comedians I don't even know because I really wasn't paying that much attention to. My partner Steve Skirnish was deep into that culture. You remember Steve, and but there was a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and a lot of beautiful women. They're throwing themselves out, but a lot of them were using stuff, right? So there's a lot of hazard for cops when you start mixing sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the ladies are very friendly, right? So. And some of those guys, unfortunately, succumb to it, and you don't always see it. But when it does happen, I know we were just pissed.
You might not know what's going on. I mean, I rented the Roxy to do a comedy show, and after the show, innocently, a group of us, hey, let's go next door to the Rainbow Room when you have dinner. I mean, after dinner, hey, you guys might be in trouble. You're not supposed to be in here. What? And of course, there was like a standing order at the time. You weren't supposed to. Supposedly, the owner was a made guy, and he gave free meals or whatever. But
I can't remember the chief's name. The black guy was our captain at the time.
Yeah,
you want to put that out.
Yeah. And so, but we were going to a place for dinner. I mean, we're not supposed to eat here. I didn't know that.
Oh, well, they would. You would go there at the Rainbow Room, and they would put they put a tablecloth on in front of the car so you could eat. I mean, it was. They went out of their way, and there were probably some stuff going on there, and I wouldn't say it was.
Hey, guess what? When I rented the Roxy, there was nothing free on my contract. I paid to rent everything.
Yeah. So hey, you know what? Maybe that's a way to keep us away, saying that it was corrupted like that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And trying to alleviate any problems before they get out of hand.
Yeah.
You look at our Arco Narco. Remember that?
Yeah.
Wow, I know. Shocking.
All those guys that were corrupted, number one, by their sergeant, and once they got you, they made you stay in more, and the guys were taking coke and money and also tons of money. And what's funny is I read an article. On Connolly, the FBI agent that was corrupt. One of his supervisors stated, we knew something was wrong, but we didn't want to tackle it. We didn't want to, because he's bringing in all these other arrestees, all these high crime guys from the Italian mafia, because Vulgar was giving them the info. They
gave him a pass.
They didn't want to. Well, let's not shoot the gift horse in the mouth.
They had a name for him: high echelon informants. High echelon informants.
That's right. Yeah.
They knew something was wrong because number one, like one of the Arco guys, he bought a brand new boat, paid cash for it.
That's right. Yeah.
Same with Connolly, the FBI agent.
All they had to do is look at the house I was living in and the cars I was driving, and they could tell I wasn't on the take. I mean, I had sometimes my windows start falling, I would paint them up, tape them up, so my kids were in Catholic schools. Trust me, you could just look at how I lived my life, and I was not styling, I was just humping, Let's go on to the next show, our next scene. It's a cop in the crew. So they recognize they got a cop in the crew, and Costello's got to deal with this, and he's working with Sullivan, Matt Damon's character, figure out. And what they want is all the information of the people in the crew, right? And this becomes important later on when Leo DiCaprio's character comes out of in from the cold, so to speak, from another movie. So he comes in, and so they gather the information, and they're going to run all these guys. It's interesting now. That's all traceable, right? Obviously it's not practical. He's running all these guys on a machine, on a computer, and all of that stuff is traceable, even then, as to who used it. So they would eventually figure out who he is, if you know what you're talking about here. But hey, got to make for drama in the movie and make it easy. So he runs these guys to try and figure out who's in the crew, and he can't figure them out. And they're also trying to do other things to try and figure out who's in the crew, right? Who's the informant. And so in addition to running them, there's a scene, and I don't think I have the scene here, but Costello decides he's going to use another crew, right? And he's got a couple guys out front that are kind of playing around. Are you a
Yeah.
cop? Are you a guy? That guy's. Remember that? That was a pretty funny scene.
Yeah.
And but he comes in and he says, "Hey, we don't need you. We're going with another crew today." Now you remember this? What he did? And so they were weeding out who's the rat in their crew, right? And when they tell him, "Hey, I'm going to use another crew, and we're going to do this big narco bust," DiCaprio's character calls Queenan and tells him this, right? This is going to happen. But fortunately, Queenan does not tell Sullivan's character. So it doesn't get back to him right away. So they think that he's clean, right? They think that he's not the rat. So they're working this a couple different ways. They're setting these guys up. They're setting the different crew members up to see if that information gets back to Sullivan or not, or Matt Damon's character or not, which would tell them they're a rat. And they're also running him, right, John? So they're playing a smart game. And if I remember correctly, when we were working, to deal with undercovers in biker gangs, the bikers used girlfriends that worked at the DMV, right? I remember that coming out. Do you remember that story?
Yep.
So they had their own intel network. The gangs, these guys have their intel network, and they're setting traps for these guys, right? So so they're looking for the FBI. They're looking for the informant that's in their crew. And I think ultimately they did figure that out with the FBI in real life too, that these guys were corrupt and dirty, and they didn't know how to handle it, so they just worked around them. But there is a line that is said somewhere during there, says, "Do you have cats?" Right? And I
That's
think
right.
this right, and it was funny, right? Because he's trying to visit his girlfriend here, right? And or the girl that is. Well, it's actually Sullivan's girlfriend. It's Matt Damon's girlfriend, but he sleeps with her, right? But he asked her, "Do you have cats?" Or I can't remember who said that line.
I think
but
he said, "I'm surprised you don't have any cats." He
yeah,
makes
I know.
note that there's no cats. Yeah.
I thought that was another great line, because the whole
Yeah, that was
whatever,
great. Yeah.
and typical blue collar Irish kind of quip and comment. John, what did you think? Another great line, right?
Oh, that's amazing. The writing in the show. Very well done.
So the crazy thing about this is Sullivan is given the task to weed out the rat in the state police, the staties. And he goes to Queenan for some advice. And what does Queenan say to him? He says, "Well, if you want to know who your rat is, you got to tail Costello." And they almost find out, who he is, right? Because they are, he's got what's his name? Costigan is following following Costello, and he sees him meet with Sullivan in a porn theater, which is also
That's right. Yeah.
a very
You just can't get a face on him.
yeah, he can't get a face on, but also a very funny scene, right? Because Jack Nicholson's character is pretending like he's having an orgasm, turns around with a dildo in his hands, and
Yeah, it was so funny.
who thinks of this stuff? Right? But it can't be just a straightforward serious scene. They got to throw this in there, and again, this guy's 70 years old, and he says this to him: "Why are you still in the game, man? You're 70 years old." Well, obviously he loves it, right? He loves it.
Right. Yeah.
He loves it, right? And he's going to keep doing it as long as because he gets power, and he's got prestige just by being the gangster in the room. But what Sullivan realizes, for me to find out who the informant is, who's working on in the crew, the criminal crew, I got to follow Queenan. So he uses the advice that Queenan gave him, that Martin Sheen character gave him, to find out who the rat was in the state police, to find out who the rat is on Costello's crew, right?
Right.
And so, and he's elevated. He's now internal affairs, and he gets to investigate whoever he wants, which is actually lunacy. That's crazy to me. And he uses a surveillance team to follow Captain Queenan, using Captain Queenan's advice on how to find the rat, right? And so he does that. And these guys, the surveillance team, doesn't really understand what's going on. Our surveillance team guys were, it's pretty boring stuff, but they're pretty sharp guys. You gotta, I think they're gonna smell a rat there pretty quick. And also internal affairs, they're probably not going to use a straight surveillance team to do something like that. It would be, kind of a mock-up surveillance team from ICAB or internal criminals or something like that, right? But hey, this is the show, so they're following Queenan, so they're surveilling on Captain Queenan as a way to find out who Leo DiCaprio is, who the rat is in Costello's crew. And I personally didn't understand why Queenan didn't just shoot it out with these guys. But so here, you can see that Queenan and them are trying to go to the meetup place without attracting attention. Which this is kind of it reminds me of the surveillance scene in The French Connection, because they were on a subway as well. How do you pretend like you're not surveilling somebody on a subway train when you keep getting off on the same car and you're going to the same places, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, they're going to their meeting location, and the surveillance team is working to follow Queenan to find out who he is, right? And eventually, they end up meeting at the top of this building, right? And they're talking, and he's telling them how it's getting out of hand. It's getting they know that they got a rat. They're looking for the rat. It's getting out of hand. I got to get out. You don't realize how dangerous it is. He's having, anxiety problems. I mean, his girlfriend, or everybody's girlfriend, I guess in this case, she's given him some anxiety medication so he can get through this. But they do. Yeah.
And can you, maybe if I'm jumping ahead, clear this up for me? Because the one guy who ends up dying, and they said, well, first of all, he tells DiCaprio, hey, I gave you the wrong address, but you showed up at the right one. Now, did that happen? Or?
Well,
yes.
in the movie it did, yes. Yeah.
Oh, in the movie, okay. I wasn't sure if that was right, because then they said that he was a Boston copper. It came out, and then the Castillo said, well, they say that just so we'll believe that he wasn't.
He wasn't a Boston cop. He was a thug. He was a gangster.
Okay. Yeah.
And so he's calling around to get the crew together because they think they got a line, because Sullivan or Matt Damon's characters now call them, hey, they're meeting together, right? They're together. Go here. You're going to find them, right? Now, he has to know that they're going to take down Captain Queenan as well, right? That they're going to have this confrontation with this captain on the state police, and they realized that they were following him. But yeah, when they're calling around for the crew to come together, that guy gives Leo DiCaprio an address, and that address ends up being the wrong address. He showed up only because he was the guy. He was the rat in the crew. He's there meeting with Queenan, right? And unfortunately the right guy got shot, I guess, here, because he didn't survive long enough to tell the rest of the crew.
Right.
So these guys now go there, and they're armed to the teeth, and Sullivan is telling the surveillance crew, just stay back, just let him meet, because he's got the crew on the way to shoot him, right?
Right.
So he's got the surveillance team pulled back. I mean, it's good writing, but this is just a little bit unrealistic, right? Because I don't think the surveillance crew guys would be going for this in real life. They're nosy guys. They're going to want to see what's going on. They're not going to take, and we give people missions and send them out, right, to do their job. We don't tell them on the radio how to do everything. Their job is, who is he meeting with, right? And he's implied that Captain Queenan is corrupt. That's the information I got. That's why you're surveilling him. Shut up, do your job, right? But he has to get them backed off long enough so that the crew can get there and kill them, right? And that's exactly what happens, right?
Oh, there's the address. Okay, 314 Washington. So it wasn't the right one.
And I think he said 344 or something like that.
344 was the right one, and he sent him 314. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. And so they're on top here. They realize that that they've been burned, and it's interesting how Queenan, he's going to try and slow him down. I probably didn't realize he was going to lose his life, but
no.
And to give Leo DiCaprio a chance to get away, here's the surveillance team. What's going on here, right? Who are these guys? And they're all heavily armed, and they start rushing up. And now there's a point in this scene. Queenan, they recognize they're coming up. They're trapped. They're coming up the stairs. They're using the elevator, and he says, "I'm going to slow him down." What I didn't, man, he's got a 9 on him. Looks like he had a 9mm on him, and he's got these guys in the funnel of death coming out of the elevator. I don't know. I think I'd have been, my gun would have been out, and I'd have been open up as soon as I saw these guys with guns, right? And I don't know.
That's the only part of the movie that's a little weird.
I didn't understand that. Maybe he thought he could talk his way out of it. But man, if I'm going to go down, he had the advantage on this, right? And I mean, what do you think of that, John? You'd have been capping, right? Hey, I'm going to give him cover, but my cover is going to be with a little pieces of lead, right?
And he plays it so smooth. Hey, how you guys doing? What are you guys doing here? Next thing you know, he's flying off the roof. That didn't set well with me.
You're outnumbered. You're I don't use the F word, but you are definitely in a bad spot, right? You're going to go. You're going to be delivering some messages, in little pieces of lead at these guys. You're not going to go down without a fight.
Exactly. Now he wanted to delay them so Costigan DiCaprio could get away, but the quickest way to delay him is start throwing lead downfield at him.
Yeah,
they're going to be throwing it at you.
Because everybody will come to you, right? And I don't know. That's how I thought about it. Cliff. What do you think? I mean, you'd have been. I'm going down hard. I ain't going down easy.
That's the one thing that didn't really fit. So I can't. Somebody brought up too, and I guess this was the only remake of a foreign film that won an Academy Award, or the first one. I didn't realize. I guess the Hong Kong was the original made from. I guess.
Yeah, it's Infernal Investigations.
Infernal.
I heard that. I read that Scorsese didn't realize until he was set to direct that was a remake of a foreign film. But that part is, well, for only that little part not to make sense, it's a pretty good movie as far as being accurate.
Yeah, and I think Martin Sheen played a good character, and he's not always the leading man in these films anymore, but he's always been a good actor. I remember him from Apocalypse Now, right? So great movie there. But he was also I don't remember who did you? I think you did one of my shows, Johnny B, where I had him on as a very young actor, his first starring role in The Incident. Was that you that was on? It was.
No, I didn't do The Incident.
Yes. No.
Now, I know it was Matt Rodriguez. I can't remember who the other guy was on the show, but he was a very young first starring role, and he's been good in everything. I really like him as an actor, and he's also, contrary to Alec Baldwin, he's a man of faith. He's very, very religious. I did see him in church one time. I was attending a local church here, and he lives in the Malibu area. I'm fairly close to Malibu, and he goes to different churches to pray, and I saw him there, right? So I like him as an actor. He's a good guy, and unfortunately his character dies. But this guy, he comes off the roof, and these guys are trying to figure what's going on, and Sullivan is telling him just to stay there because he knows it's his guys, his criminal crew guys, that are taking DiCaprio down, who he still doesn't know who he is, and taking down Queenan, right? And these guys, like typical coppers, are saying, no, we're not doing that. And they engage these guys in a gun battle. And the one guy who's figured out, he's figured out that DiCaprio is the rat, is the guy that gets shot. So good writing, happenstance, right? It could happen, right? And he's the guy that gets shot, and they take everybody back to the lair, and the bad guy's place. And they escape. Queenan's dead, but DiCaprio is gone. But DiCaprio also realizes he's got problems here because there's only two people know that he's really a cop. And one of them is dead now, and the person who controls who he is dead, Queenan, and he knows he's being hunted, right? So he is scared at this point, and amazingly. What Costello is still going on with crime. So the next scene is, you would think they would back off and slow down, and they go into another raid. Frank is going to do another dope deal. Alex Baldwin character is demanding to know who the undercover is, and Digman, which is refuses. The sergeant who was working with Queenan refuses, and in fact, he says he quits, right? So this character quits, and that's I forget the character, Digman, who's a character. There's so many actors in this one, but he quits. But there's another great line. He says, "That's okay. World needs plenty of bartenders," right? Great line. You want to quit? Yeah, the world needs plenty of bartenders. And so Digman quits, and we go into this next raid, and this is when Frank is done. At this point, Sullivan, who is Matt Damon's character, is going through Queenan's material. right? He's going through Queenan's material. He tries to contact his undercover. There isn't original contact. One of the things he notices, though, is that Frank is an informant for the FBI. Remember that? So he notices in Queenan's notes, don't talk to the FBI. FBI is compromised. That Costello is an informant for them. And he realizes, whoa, he's got people everywhere. And he recognizes if things get rough between him and Costello, he can give up Sullivan, Matt Damon's character, pretty easily because he's a top echelon informant, right? And he's seen him give other people up and to save himself. So why? Hey, not only is he valuable in giving information, but he's also a valuable person in that he can give him up because he's a corrupt cop, and law enforcement would be very interested in that if that came to pass. And so he recognizes that he isn't part of the team. He's getting played just like everybody else, right, John?
Yep, absolutely.
And he realizes he's got some liability. So in this raid, I think Martin, I think we wrote it down there. It's I wrote Frank's done. This is the raid where he's doing the bust in the warehouse, and Sullivan now realizes he's done. Frank calls and says, "Hey, have these surveillance people pulled off because I got to do this thing. Just do my job. Listen to me." And Sullivan's realizing, man, I have a short horizon if I continue following this guy. And he decides to let the raid go through, right? He says, I know where it's at. Pull the surveillance off. This is where it's going to go down at. And I think he knew right there and then that he was going to make sure that Frank did not survive this raid.
That's right. He decided.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Cliff? He's now... He is the crew of one now. He's going to protect himself.
Yep, he's going to protect himself, and he knows he's going to take him out because he has no other choice at this point. Yeah, because he knows he's an informant, and the only way is if he goes down in a legitimate shootout and he gets killed, then oh well.
Right, and so if he could take him out, then the links move away from him, right?
Correct.
Which is what he wants. And so in the end, when they had the showdown between him and Costello is actually, this is probably the first time where he's behind in the chess match here. Sullivan's already he's going to make his move. He's going to kill Costello, and Costello's a little slow on the uptake. It takes him a while to figure it out, but he recognizes when he starts asking, you're an informant of the FBI. He knows he's dead at this point, but he's also hurt, and Sullivan's got the drop on him, and they end up shooting it out, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And Costello, and it's I think it's he's afraid of this guy anyways, right? He grew up as a kid fearing this guy. He shoots him one in the chest, and the guy still manages to get a round off, and then he pumps several more into him, and then he plays the hero by saying, "Yeah, I got him,
yeah,
right? I killed him, right?" And later on, everybody's clapping and cheering that he got him, right?
Yeah.
So he's trying to tie up some loose ends. He's got one more loose end, and that who is the undercover, right? That's the one.
And
loose
it
end.
seems like when they're applauding it, that there was some like attitude, like, oh, we weren't quite sure, but now we know you're really a righteous, honest guy, right?
Yeah, you killed the guy. It can't be you, right?
Can't be you because, now you've proven how that you're honorable and you're not corrupted.
Well, this rolls right into the next scene. So just roll it right in the next scene, Martine, and that's the scene where he's busted, right? And this is DiCaprio realizes, he sets the meeting. He realizes he learns that this guy is the guy that did this, right? He gets the tapes that Costello made, because remember, Costello's a survivor, so he makes tapes with all these corrupt people, and he listens to those tapes. He knows that Sullivan is the corrupt guy. He contacts him and demands a meet to work this out. And he's going to take him to jail. He's going to be the cop. I'm taking you to jail. I'm done playing the bad guy. Now I'm going to be what I want to be, and that's right. The cop. And you are going down for killing Queen. And I may not have been friends with Queen, but he was a good guy doing his job, and I'm taking you down. And another great line in this: "What? I erased you. You don't exist. What is this? A citizen's arrest?" So they got these quips going back and forth. What is this? A citizen's arrest? You can arrest me? You're nothing. He deleted him because when he was in his office identifying who he was, Leo DiCaprio realized that he was the informant. He saw some correspondence that had been given to him from Costello, Sullivan, that is. He realized he was the corrupt guy. He got out of there, and now Sullivan realizes that he also knows, right? And so he's going to try. So he deleted his identity. He's going to try and take him out any way he can. He knows he's a hunted man, and he flips it, and he's going to take him to jail. And he invites the one person that knows him from the academy that's been in this game. John, you brought it up. He invites his friend there and tries to explain to him, I am a cop. This guy is corrupt. This guy killed Queen, right?
That's the scene where, Anthony Anderson, he's telling, you know me, you know who I am, you know who I am. Remember, we ran the academy together. You know me, yeah. It's kind of a turn on an earlier scene, right, where they were telling him, you'll never be a cop. That's one thing we do know. Yeah. And now in this circumstance, he switches it around. Now I'm a cop and I'm arresting you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when he's taking him down, what's his name says, "Go ahead and kill me," right?
Yeah,
Damon's go ahead, kill me, and it's like what I think so you can get the bagpipes and the hero,
yeah,
that
right. Yeah. Hey,
I'm arresting you. This is what's happening. I'm destroying your life, just like you destroyed so many other lives. And and it's how this played out was pretty shocking, right? So he does this, you know me. They don't trust each other, but they agree to go take him down and to figure out what's going on. And then that's when the other character eventually comes in and kills both Leonardo DiCaprio, which I did not see coming, and kills his black friend here who knows him, right? You know me from the academy. Kills both of them. And it doesn't surprise you because you know what? Actually, Buddy Bolger had multiple people who were informants for him, right? And so I mean, this fits with the real life. It makes for a good scene, although a lot of good guys get killed here. They get the Legion of Merit. I'm gonna give you the Legion of Merit here, but both of these guys get killed by the second rat who's in the state police, right? So what'd you think, John? This was a shocking scene.
Yeah. I forgot about it when I was watching again. I went, "Oh crap," And then at the end, when after it was the guy that went to the academy with Matt Damon, and he says, "What do you think? Costello didn't have more than one?" And then he unhooks him, and he goes to pick up his gun, and Matt Damon
was
shoots him in the
shocking.
head. Clean up all those little ties up.
So Matt Damon is truly a killer because he's closing all those loose ends, and he sells his friend from the academy as the true informant in the state police, so that he can avoid detection. And he closes all the loose ends. He's going to be the hero, and so it was it was great writing. It was great one-liners here. And you can see the logical progression of this is he has to kill this guy because, one's going to flip on the other and the guy was lesser involved. He can survive this, but Damon won't if that guy flips, right, Cliff?
Yeah. I mean, it was just, in the movie, because there was a lot going on, you had to pay attention. There's a lot of drama and tension. So already it's a good movie. And then to have the ending be so shocking. And then just when you were just shocked, then when Matt Damon shoots his classmate, that was another thing we didn't see coming, right? So, I mean, that just a lot of movies you see it coming. This one you couldn't see a lot of things coming.
No, which is it was very suspenseful. There's the guy that he ends up getting killed as well. And Martine, roll in right into the next scene. We're coming to the end of our show, but roll right in the next scene because in the end, all of the bad guys have a comeuppance, right? They have a comeuppance. All the bad guys end up getting killed, right? I know they want to do a Departed 2. I heard they want to do a Departed 2, but pretty much all of them get killed, right? So how do you do a Departed 2 and all the really great characters are killed, right?
Yeah, I don't know how you could.
It'd have to be based upon just a completely another...
or they do one of those ones that's a prequel.
Prequel, yeah.
That would be good, yeah.
Yeah,
but here it is. So Mark Wahlberg's character, Digman, is laying in wait for Matt Damon. He knows this guy killed all these people. He knows he's the rat. And it's interesting that Matt Damon's character, he sees this, he recognizes what's going to happen, and he accepts it. He says, okay, go ahead, right? And then Mark Wahlberg takes care of Matt Damon's character, Sullivan, and kills him. Of course, all the real bad guys, most of them end up in prison, as John talked about. Connolly ended up in prison. His boss ended up in prison, who was corrupted. The state police lieutenant who was working with the Winter Hill Gang ended up in prison. Steve Fleming's brother ended up doing some jail time from Boston PD. They all ended up in prison. But in this movie, they all ended up getting killed. And here he is getting killed. And the great thing about this is, is that last scene, right? That last scene where the rat just is. So there's the bagels, right?
Where the rat is walking across with the golden globe behind. Yeah.
With the gold and the state building.
Yeah, the state building. Yeah.
With the golden thing right behind it.
Yep.
Great finish. There's the rat. There's their Capitol building. I've seen that. I've been to that building. So a fantastic movie, guys, and stick around for a debrief. But I want to, if you guys like the show, if our audience liked the show, do me a favor and like it on YouTube and migrate over to Rumble and like it there too. Make sure you're a subscriber on YouTube or a follower on Rumble. Make a comment about what you liked about it, and you give us some tips on some movies you want us to do. I know we already heard some of that. And also share this with a friend. So John, Cliff, thank you for coming on the show. This is Pop Culture Minefield's Morning Coffee with the Chief. You can watch us every Tuesday on YouTube and Rumble at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I always have some great gaffes, always have some great commentary, and we have a lot of fun with a bunch of cops. And thank you very much, Martin. You can go ahead and take her away.
Shh. Quiet.
Those sons of bitches.
Ma, I'm doing a show.